Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. For this video, we are going to be doing a 3D turtle cake. I actually got to make this for a baby shower. It was a ton of fun. And I almost fell off the chair, excuse me. So what I did for this video was I used poster board because this was a pretty massive cake, and I did actually use two poster boards. I hot glued them together just to give it a little bit more stabilization, and I began stacking my cakes so that I could carve them down to the shape that I wanted. So of course for the body I used a oval cake for the bottom, a larger one, a little bit smaller one for the top. The reason I did a smaller one on the top, I know it looks a little bit off right now, but it's because if you look at the back of a turtle shell, it kind of flattens down at the back, so I wanted to kind of curve it out so that way it got that specific look for the turtle that I was going for. And then I kind of smoothed down the edges so that you didn't have so many sharp edges going around, so that when I add the buttercream, it looks like a nice beautiful turtle shell. Of course for the head of the cake, I did use 2 half spear cakes, and of course cut the dome part off and put them together with a little bit of buttercream so that it created a perfect circle. When it was time to stack and fill my layers, I did create a dam of buttercream because I was using a little bit more of a non-stable filling for this, and I didn't want it kind of sliding around while I was decorating this cake. So once I was complete with this part, I stacked the cake layers back on top of each other and prepared for the crumb coat. So for the crumb coat of this cake, because I had just carved around and it can make your cake a little bit more delicate, I did take a bit of my buttercream, microwave it for about 10 seconds just to kind of soften it down a little bit, so that way when I'm rubbing it onto my cake, it doesn't kind of tear and rip my cake layers. So once you have this part complete and you have it pretty filled up in the gaps so that way it makes a nice even coat, you can go ahead and place your cake in the fridge to set up for about a good probably 10 to 15 minutes or so, and get ready to create your final coat. And I'll show you a little bit of a trick to that here in just 1 minute. So create your crumb coat, get away all those crumbs on your cake board, and then let's get ready for the final coat. So for the final coat, if you need to soften up your buttercream, you can pop it into the microwave for a little bit. If you don't need to, just go ahead and stack it on in a nice thick coat evenly around the entire cake. Once you are done with that part, you do want to take a piece of acetate paper. I did not have one on hand, so I actually used a card literally from a deck of cards. You can get them at the Dollar Tree for $1, and it's about the same thickness as acetate paper. You can kind of curve it around so it goes with the roundness of the cake, and it works just as well, honestly. So if you notice that there's any air bubbles or any imperfections in your buttercream, you can always smooth it, add a little bit more buttercream in those missing areas or the thinner areas, and then continuously just kind of smooth it with your card until you're happy with the look and the smoothness of the cake. You don't really want to leave any lumps or bumps or lines in this, because when you go to put your your fondant onto your cake, you will be able to see any imperfections in your buttercream underneath the fondant, unless you have some super thick fondant, and usually people don't like that on their cake. They want a nice little pretty thin layer of fondant. So once this is ready to go, you can pop that in the fridge to set up while you roll out your fondant. So I am using a light blue fondant for the head of the cake, and of course you want to roll it out, pop out any air bubbles, and then roll it a little bit better just to kind of smooth it out. And then I use a little bit of water to adhere the fondant to the cake. I've also seen people use shortening and piping gel as well. So once I have my fondant laid onto the head portion of the turtle, I went around, just kind of smoothed it with my fingers, my hands. You can also use a piece of fondant on itself, and it kind of helps give it a nice smooth finish as well. And I used my Dresden tool after I kind of got all the air out, packed it in where I wanted it to be. I used my Dresden tool on the bottom to kind of press in and underneath and kind of cut that fondant from the bottom. It helps give it a little bit more of a rounded look. And then of course for the back of the turtle's neck where the shell is going to go, I did actually use my X-Acto knife in that area, and with my remaining blue and a little bit of white, and then of course a little bit of blue gel food coloring, I created a marbled effect that I was going to be placing on the sides of the turtle to decorate the cake board with. So for this effect, I took some water and painted it onto my cake board, and then went ahead and rolled out my fondant until I was happy with how marbled it was. Went ahead and put it onto the cake board. You want to make sure that you press it up against the cake as much as possible. Don't worry about the parts that are kind of folding over. We're going to be going ahead and cutting that off with an X-Acto knife later. Right now you just need to concentrate on taking your fondant smoother, pressing it up against the cake as much as possible, just to make sure it's all evened out. Now once you have your cake trimmed, then you can begin just kind of making sure that there's no little white parts of the cake board sticking out underneath. and continue this same method with the other side of the cake. If you have any places where the fondant didn't go together or it kind of overlaps, that's totally fine. Cut an even line or take a piece of fondant about the same size and do the same thing. Kind of press it with your fondant smoother and it will kind of even out for you and kind of press down into itself so it'll have a nice smooth look. Let's move on to the face. So for the face, I used the largest piping tip that I had, and I just kind of pressed the areas where I wanted the eyes to be. I used my Dresden tool to kind of give it a little bit more of a detailed face, a little bit of the nose, and I used a paintbrush actually for the nose because I wanted it to be a tiny bit bigger than the little Dresden tool piece that I had. And then of course finished with the mouth. Now for the eyes, for the white part, that's going to be the largest part. I did use the same tip that I had used, the same piping tip that I used to create the circles to cut out the white piece, and then I just went a little bit smaller, so a couple sizes smaller for the brown piece, a little bit smaller for the black, and of course a small round piping tip for the white catchlight of the eyes. Now if you're pressing your fondant on and it's a little bit off shape, that's totally fine. Take your time and kind of just press around the edge, round it out. Use your Dresden tools to kind of smooth it so that you don't have any kind of points on your eyeballs. And you can glue this again with either water or shortening, whatever you prefer. Once you're done with the face, we can begin with the legs. So for the legs, I did roll out a big long roll of fondant. I cut it into four even pieces, and then I kind of just laid them around where the turtle's legs were going to be. Now to get that kind of dip vertical look, I actually took my small rolling pin, fondant roller, sorry, and pressed starting from the top down to the bottom just to create that kind of slanted look of the legs. And then of course I added a little bit of polka dots. Now for the shell of this, again, I painted a little bit of water, rolled out some thick green fondant. Now this part is, you do want to make sure that of course you get all the air bubbles out from underneath where the shell is going to be, where the green fondant is on the back of the cake. But for the edging part, you don't have to worry too specifically because we're going to be adding a border to the shell. So just get it a little bit even around the sides. Make sure not, like of course you don't want one side super long and, way out past the legs and one side real thin. You don't want to do that. But kind of make it even going around the entire cake. And then we're going to begin with our design. Now for the design part, I did take a large round circle cutter just because I wanted to see exactly where the middle top of my shell was going to be, and I just used that to kind of get the size of the shape that I was going to be creating. So you do probably want to have a picture in front of you just to see exactly how you need to shape these little shell designs into the top of the shell. And I used my Dresden tool for this, and I kind of went around side to side so that way I knew that it was nice and even and I wasn't kind of overlapping with these little designs. And once I was done with this part, I began to kind of take this same design and go up towards the top of the shell and then again down towards the bottom of the shell. Now you just want to continue this until your shell is fully done and pull it as much down to the sides as possible. We are going to be adding a shell border around here, but we want to get it to look as realistic as possible, so pull that design down as far as you can. Once you're happy with this part of the cake, you do want to roll some long strips of green fondant, kind of on a thicker side. Make sure that they're even in width, and we're going to be taking those in two parts because we have a larger cake here. And we're going to be putting one band starting from the top of the back of the head, wrapping it all the way around the other side of the cake, and then continue this around with the other side as well. Once you have it nice and wrapped around evenly around the bottom of the shell, we are going to be taking our Dresden tool or whatever tool you're more comfortable with. You can use the back of a paintbrush as well and just kind of create these little lines. And the part where the two pieces of fondant connect together, you can just make one of those lines in there and it'll kind of help blend it together so you won't be able to notice where they connect. Now to enhance this shell a little bit, to make it a little bit more three-dimensional, I did take my small ball tool and kind of just go back in a back and forth motion around each part of the shell with the design that I had created first with the Dresden tool. Now this is one of my favorite parts of the cake. I got to finally use a sweet stamp. For the sweet stamps, they're pretty nice. You can get them in different designs and fonts, and you literally just put them on top of your fondant, get them to the shape that you want it to be, and then press in. You want to press in pretty hard so that way you get a little bit more in depth. So when you're going back in to paint this, the paint's not overflowing out of the indents that you've created with your sweet stamps. I use a little bit of gold luster dust here and a little bit of food grade alcohol and of course a very small thin paintbrush. You just want to be very careful when you're painting this in, just to make sure that you have it real nice and neat looking on your cake board. Gold especially is really hard to get off if you accidentally get some in an area where it's not supposed to be. I really hope you guys enjoyed this video. Please feel free to subscribe if you'd like to see more and hit that notification bell. Of course, if you have any questions, feel free to comment below, and thank you guys for watching.